Artillery or tanks? Which is better? Let's find out. For 6 IPCs, you can get a tank which rolls 1 dice at 3 or less in combat, a 50% hit rate. For 7 IPCs, you can get an infantry and an artillery, 2 dice at 2 or less, each with a 33% hit rate. Let's say we've got 50 IPCs to spend. It's a crucial buy because everything we purchase now will be attacking an army of 5 infantry, 4 tanks and 2 fighters. Here's a question for you. Which of the following 3 buys gives us the best chances of success? Purchase A, focusing on tank production, we buy 7 tanks and 2 artillery for 50 IPCs. Purchase B, an artillery focus, 7 artillery and 7 infantry for 49 IPCs. Or purchase C, a mixed bag, 4 infantry, 5 artillery and 3 tanks for exactly 50 IPCs. You got 5 seconds to decide. The correct answer is B, with about a 57% chance of victory. Admittedly not great odds, but the best of the 3 options. In second place is the mixed bag with about a 42% chance of victory, and in last place by far is the tank buy with chances of success as low as 8%. For many of you, choice B was probably an obvious answer, but my first instinct would have been to go with the mixed bag buy. Intrigued, I did a bit more experimenting. I gave myself less money to spend, more money to spend. I added an air force to each of the buys. I gave the enemy army more stuff. But I couldn't find a build including 1 or more tanks, which was more effective at getting hits than an equivalent build focusing on just artillery and infantry. And when you crunch the numbers, it turns out that the chances of at least 1 hit being scored by an infantry-artillery pair is 55%. Though the odds are only slightly better than 1 tank, the figure definitely adds up the more infantry-artillery pairs you have, and there's also that slim chance that you'll actually get 2 hits. So with tanks costing 6 IPCs, it's more cost-effective to buy artillery and infantry if what you want is maximal hits in combat when attacking. But what about if tanks are worth 5 IPCs, like they are in the Anniversary Edition? If we repeat the same experiment again, purchase A, the tank focus, will get us 10 tanks for 50 IPCs. Purchase B is the same as before, 7 artillery and 7 infantry for 49 IPCs. And purchase C, the mixed bag, would be 5 infantry, 5 artillery, and 3 tanks for 50 IPCs. Purchase A, the tank focus, is still the worst with only 30% chance of victory. Purchase B, the artillery focus, is the same at 60%. And purchase C, the mixed bag, actually ties with purchase B at 60%. And this is actually only because tanks cost 1 IPC less, which meant we had an extra 3 IPCs to spend on an additional infantry unit. The more tanks you add in exchange for artillery and infantry, the lower and lower the overall chances become, but still, it seems like you can get away with buying a lot more tanks if they only cost 5 IPCs. Let's pit 1 infantry-artillery pair against 1 tank. What are the chances of success for the attacker here? It isn't 50%, or 60%, or 70%. It's actually a staggering 80% chance of victory for the infantry-artillery pair, according to the battle odds calculator at aatoolkit.com. And I couldn't believe the odds were this good against the tank. So I rolled out this battle 26 times, and it really was no contest at all. So far we've only compared artillery and tanks based on their costs and statistical chances of scoring hits. There's much more to consider. Tanks can move 2 spaces and blitz, and they're the hardest hitting land unit on both attack and defense. They're also the cheapest unit, which can hit at 3. Newly purchased tanks can quickly catch up to the front line. Tanks you already have near the front will have a lot more attack options during the combat phase. You haven't got to worry as much about positioning your tanks because of their extended range. Artillery, on the other hand, can only attack adjacent territories, so it's much more important to place them in a good spot ahead of time. A well-placed tank behind enemy lines can be a real pain, as it can easily blitz around and capture empty territories. A Japanese tank blitzing across Russia comes to mind. If you'll be positioning your troops ahead of a big battle in an upcoming turn, there's no point buying more artillery if they won't be able to reach the territory in time to partake. Instead, buy tanks, or aircraft, which can quickly catch up in time for the big battle. Once a previous objective has been achieved, surviving tanks can quickly move to another area and start working on their next objective, leaving the infantry and artillery behind. If you've got a factory which can only produce 2 units, but you need to reinforce that territory with something that can pack a punch, it's better to produce 2 tanks rather than infantry or artillery. Tanks are just much more versatile and give you a lot of flexibility when conducting your combat phase, and that's ultimately the kind of position you want to be in. You want to be able to threaten as many areas as possible to keep your enemy guessing what your next move is going to be. If it's an amphibious assault, we won't necessarily be limited by a set amount of IPCs, like we have been in all the previous examples, but we will be limited by a set number of units, determined by how many transport ships we have. If we've got 7 transports, we can load them up with 7 infantry and any other 7 land units, probably consisting of tanks and or artillery. If we load up Purchase B from earlier, being 7 infantry and 7 artillery, we have about a 60% chance of victory against that same enemy army as before, but with 7 infantry and 7 tanks, the chances are more like 75%. Artillery are effective when they have an infantry to pair with. If they haven't got any infantry to support, then it's kind of wasted potential. Once your infantry have been wiped out in a battle, the attack power of your remaining artillery diminishes, whereas tanks will always roll at 3, their attack power is always the same. That being said, tanks which aren't supported by infantry are pretty useless too. So I suppose my conclusion here is to try and make sure you've got enough artillery to support your infantry and enough infantry to support your tanks. So which is better, artillery or tanks? The answer is the classic, it depends. If tanks are only 5 IPCs to buy, then I would probably favour the tank, or at least I wouldn't give it as much thought. But at 6 IPCs, which by the way is what I think tanks should cost, it's much more dependent on the situation. If you need to get somewhere fast, get tanks. If it's the turn before a big battle and any artillery you buy now won't make it in time, but tanks will, get tanks. If you have got time to build up ahead of a big battle, get artillery, and make sure you have enough infantry to pair them with. If it's an amphibious assault, tanks will pack a bigger punch and could be better than artillery. Unless you have a strong air force available to support the attack, then maybe go with artillery and use the spare change to get something else. Make sure your tanks aren't immediately killed in their first battle. Obviously, the more battles a unit survives, the more cost-effective that purchase will be in the long run. Ideally, use them in battles where they have a good chance to live and fight another day. In the words of Tizkit, it's helpful to envision what the whole life of the unit or group of units might look like. If the purpose is a one-way march to a probable death, then go with the artillery if it can make it in time. If you foresee more variability than that, you might want to favour the tank. If the tanks succeed, then victory follows. But remember, God is on the side with the best artillery. Thanks for watching.